and attachment trauma. I am the founder of Securely Loved, and I work with clients around the world. I myself am located in Canada, but very excited to connect with Aaron and his audience. Like I said, I do work with folks around the world with specifically looking at their attachment trauma and how we can overcome some of those barriers to healthier relationships. So thank you, Aaron, for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So let's talk about a little bit about attachment then. First and foremost, can we explain what attachment is to people so that we get a good grounding before we start talking about it?
Yeah, that's an excellent place to start. What is attachment? And I think lots of people will start. I see that it's being talked about more and more, and this actually makes me really happy. So attachment is really an emotional bond that we have to another human. And when we come into the world, brand new as little babies, the way in which we interact with our caregiver, and whether that's a father, a mother, an aunt, a grandmother, the primary caregiver, the way in which we interact with that person actually forms patterns in our brain. It's almost like a set of rules for how we eventually, well into our adulthood, how we give and receive love from others. And so the initial connection that we have, whether our caregiver is, for example, very attuned to us, right? So if a baby cries and they're held and they're coddled and they learn different emotions and expressions from their caregiver's face, and they're, for the most part, taken care of emotionally. It's not just about feeding a baby. It's about giving them safety and holding them and attuning to them emotionally. Generally, when folks experience that type of upbringing, they form what's called a secure attachment. So that individual is generally, I would say, someone who is feels very safe in terms of how much they understand themselves and how they feel safe around other people. There's a sense of trust that's, essentially developed early on. And that's really, really important because this particular individual learns to see the world and love as a form of connection. Now, if we move to the other folks, and it's really hard to sort of determine specific numbers. Some studies have suggested that it's about 50% of the population that grew up in the secure attachment way. And the other 50% it falls into what we call the insecure attachment styles. And this is a continuum, right? So on one side of the scale, you'll have the anxious preoccupied. And this is the individual that generally displays behaviors where, yes, they're anxious. They generally feel lonely. They need a lot of validation and reassurance from other people. They never learned how to self-soothe. And so these individuals are very reliant on their external world to help them regulate their emotions because they never learned how to do it themselves. And then on the other spectrum, on the other side, there's the dismissive avoidant. And again, the dismissive avoidant is also not emotionally regulated. They likely experienced a form of neglect in childhood. And their response, it's a survival strategy, their response has become overly self-reliant. They don't bother to ask anyone for help because there's like this feigned helplessness, right? Why bother? No one's going to help me anyways, because they were neglected in childhood. So they learned to be alone, isolate themselves. They learn to repress their emotions and to really value their freedom and their independence. And you could imagine how that person as an adult shows up in a relationship. Now, as luck would have it, Aaron, these two folks, the dismissive avoidant and the anxious preoccupied, often find each other in a romantic context, which you can imagine is probably the worst pairing, right? Like, because one really needs this closeness and the other one really needs this space. And so that's where you see a lot of that sort of push and pull. Now, there is one last category that sits sort of in the middle of this continuum of insecure attachment, and it's the fearful avoidant. And the fearful avoidant sort of flip flops between hot and cold behavior. So they really, really desire intimacy, and they're also at the same time really afraid of it. Now, I spent most of my life as a fearful avoidant, and I've worked really hard to overcome some of those initial, I would say, thought patterns to become more secure in the way that I interact with others. But the fearful avoiding comes out of a home, oftentimes where there's abuse or, at a minimum, lots of chaos. So, in my particular example, there was physical abuse in my home. And I absolutely, for example, adored and loved my father. And I sought his attention in like all the time. His attention was golden to me, but he was also the one that was hurting me. And so when you talk about fearful avoidance, it's you really, really want to come close to someone, but that person is also the one causing harm. And so it's very difficult for a child to make heads or tails of this. And that's why they ingrain these patterns in their mind that love is chaotic. Love is intended to be this roller coaster, this back and forth, this push and pull, which we know is not a healthy dynamic, but this is what they learned. So when people grow up in a home where they're not emotionally attuned to, so neglected, abuse, perceived abandonment, they really grow up believing that the world is about survival, not about connection. So I hope that that's like it's not an easy one sentence. What is attachment? So I hope that gives folks
Yeah.
a good general sense.
Yeah, that's quite in depth. Actually, it's quite good to hear it. No, it's good because I think a lot of us don't even understand it to be honest. So to start off to improve the kind of situations, your relationships stuff, you need to first understand what your style is, what you like, etc.
Yeah.
But yes, it can be difficult for people as well to accept what they like, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and it's actually so. I mean, I work with a lot of clients who have these aha moments, right? Because they are very aware of the fact that they have certain thought patterns and that they behave in certain ways, but they don't know why. Right? So, for example, I like to use myself as an example. I, for a lifetime, was really uncomfortable around large crowds of people. I feel unsafe. And that's because growing up in the home that I did, with the level of chaos that I experienced, I had to develop hypervigilance. This was my coping mechanism. So I became hyper attuned and hyper aware of the emotions and the affect of everyone around me because my survival depended on it. So if my father, for example, came home and he was in a nasty mood, I needed to be able to discern that really quickly. The sound of his footsteps, his breathing, the way he slammed the door when he came in. Like I had to become really attuned because was I going to run and hide? Was I going to leave the house? Was I going to pretend like I wasn't home? How am I going to handle this? So these patternings, they follow us, right? And they follow us into situations that have nothing to do with the original threat, right? So the fact that I'm going to a concert, let's say, and I'm around a lot of people, my father's not standing there. That's not what I'm worried about. It's that I can't relax and be calm in my environment because I'm constantly scanning to see, am I unsafe in this moment? So what is so particularly fascinating about attachment styles is that there is a very, very distinct set of core wounds that we carry based on the type of upbringing that we had. And it's highly predictable. Like it's very categorical. So if you grew up in this type of home, you typically have these types of core wounds. And the extension of that, of the core wounds, is that it also impacts your emotional patterns, of course, right? So for an anxious preoccupied who's afraid, for example, the core wound is, I will be abandoned. So maybe they grew up in a home where they were abandoned, or they perceived that they were abandoned, right? Maybe they were dropped off every day at grandma's house because they had to go, the mother had to work, and the child might have interpreted that as abandonment. It's all about perception, right? And so they may be carrying a core wound of, I will be abandoned. And so it's not a leap to understand that their thought patterns, they're generally sad, they're generally lonely, they're generally anxious, and that their behaviors would be, centered around seeking validation, seeking proximity to others, needing constant validation. These are the folks that the internet often makes fun of, like the needy one, right? I don't like these memes. I think that they're really unfair to people, but that's who we're describing in this instance. So your attachment really does impact your emotional patterns, your communication style, your coping mechanisms, like your behaviors. There's a strong correlation between addictive behavior and addictions and insecure attachment styles. Because if you don't know how to self-soothe and you've never learned emotional regulation, like it was never taught in your household, it's very easy to understand how you reach for a bottle of whiskey.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, to be fair. That was when we're children, we don't understand. So, like, I had a really good upbringing, but again, just like you say, it's what you perceive, isn't it? So, my parents worked hard, and they worked hard to give me a really good life, and I was very, very fortunate. I had a very good life, very, very. I had close family around that were always there to care for me. But you do have that perception sometimes as a child that, oh, they don't care, they're off to work, they're doing this, they're doing that, and you're at your grandmother's house or your auntie's house, and you just think, well, and some of it, I think a lot is that's only looking back that you think that, because at the time I think it's subconscious, and you just kind of, as a child, you just kind of act out then to try and get some attention, or to try and get what you want, or try and do things. But it's probably more subconscious as a child than consciously. But then as an adult looking back, you think, oh yeah, probably didn't cope with that very well.
Yeah. So for the most part, these patterns stay at a subconscious level unless we bring them to conscious awareness, right? And a lot of times it's the same type of behavior. And when you're emotionally dysregulated, this is what's so interesting. When you're emotionally dysregulated, you yourself don't recognize it most of the time because it's your baseline. It's like that. Most people will say, well, this is just who I am. That's just the way I am, right? So they'll wake up in the morning and they're like 7 out of 10 already anxious. Nothing's happened. They're already anxious. That's their baseline. So if something does happen during the day that's difficult, it clearly pushes them over the edge, and they're likely to be explosive in their response, right? But they don't necessarily understand that these patterns, they live in the subconscious, and they bring us into adulthood. So the next time you're in a grocery store and you see, let's say, a mother is shopping with their toddler, 2, 3 years old, and the toddler is clinging for life to the mother's leg, like begging for her attention as the mother is trying to pick out a cereal box or whatnot, that behavior oftentimes stays with us. So even when you're in a romantic relationship, that child becomes typically the clingy one, right? Don't leave me, don't leave me. I only feel safe when you're around. So that metaphorical, they're hanging onto mommy's leg. Metaphorically, when we go into romantic relationships, a lot of these folks who initially had that anxiety and haven't done the work, they hold on to their partners almost in the same way. Like thinking, like, for their survival, if I let go, I'm not going to survive living without you. I can see you're sort of laughing. You've seen a
No,
lot of this?
yeah, I've seen it, I've experienced it. Yeah, it's you see it all the time, don't you? Really. what interests me though is, so obviously we go through our childhood, we pick up these things. We might not even know kind of what our attachment style is as we grow into adults. How how does that manifest as an adult? Do we often, are we attracted to people who are similar to our caregivers in how they love when we grow up,
Mm, such a good
or
question.
are we the opposite? Do we mimic our caregivers in relationships, or is it a bit of both?
Such a good question. Um, so I'm going to back up a little bit because the science of attraction is incredibly interesting. Um, and I do work with a lot of folks who are in the dating space. So we talk about this a lot. So, first of all, I want to put out there a couple of things. When we're talking about attachment styles, we are not talking about like any sort of mental illness. This is learned behavior. Okay, so I just want to be clear that this is not what we're talking about. Um, so the science of attraction actually tells us that the factor that is most prevalent in the decision that we're making towards who we're attracted to, which is never a choice. Attraction is not a choice. We're either attracted to someone or we aren't. Right? It's a whole field in itself. But the subconscious comfort zone that we have is generally what attracts us to our next partner. So I know for myself, I am attracted to people who are a little chaotic. A lot, and it's interesting because the mind doesn't distinguish between what's right or wrong. The subconscious mind just goes towards the patterns that it knows. So my subconscious mind knows the chaotic pattern very well. And I know how to survive and deal with that because I'm an expert at that. And so I typically will lean towards and be attracted towards partners that are a little on the chaotic side. So I tend to find a little bit of impulsivity interesting, creativity, someone who has variety in terms of like what they want to do and how they want to have fun. Those are the people that I'm generally attracted to because it's reproducing the chaos that I sort of know. So that subconscious comfort zone. So I have dated people who were secure, uh, and I still, logically, someone who is secure and emotionally regulated is the right partner that I'm seeking, right? But sometimes my subconscious mind will play tricks on me and tell me, you know what, this feels boring. Because I
Yeah,
do have a program that says you like a little bit of chaos. That's where the conscious awareness comes in. You have to be aware of the fact that you have these programming that will draw you in the wrong direction. Because again, your mind doesn't care what's right or wrong for you. Your subconscious mind just wants you to fall back into a pattern that's familiar. So that's why we do the awareness work, right? You bring it to your conscious mind. So now I can say, listen, a little bit of chaos is fine, but this is too much. And I know that it's not going to be good for me, right? Whereas if you haven't actually done the work to understand your own mind, you're likely to fall prey to the same patterns over and over and over and over. And then we hear things like, I don't know what it is. I just always seem to attract the crazy people. I hear this all the time. Do you hear this? All the crazy
yeah,
people come, and I hate that term. I myself don't use crazy people, but this is what people say to me without any understanding that they themselves are the ones who are leaning into these folks because they're representing something that's comfortable for them. So it's a subconscious comfort zone. It's not necessarily, I'm reproducing my father. I'm reproducing the relationship that I had with him, the dynamic, right? Now, the other thing too is that there is a part of our brain that is hardwired from years and years and years ago. We call it the lizard brain, that seeks what we call something called trait variety. And the biggest example of this would be, for example, if I was in caveman days and let's say I was very intelligent as a woman and I was resourceful, I would logically look for a man who's very strong and knows how to hunt. Because when you put the two of us together, our pairing makes it, a good match in terms of our ability to survive. That is hardwired into us. And so the flip side of that too is that we often look at traits that we repress ourselves. So as a young woman, for example, as a young girl, anger was not allowed in my house. It was not an emotion that was given any space for. You were punished if you showed anger. So I really repressed that into my psyche. And when I meet someone who can express anger in a healthy way, I'm very attracted to that. So
Yeah.
the science of attraction is actually super, super interesting. But what I want your listeners and your audience to take away from this is that attraction isn't a choice. We are attracted to who we're attracted to. And a lot of this is patterned into our minds. It becomes a problem when you recognize for yourself that I'm always choosing the wrong person. That's when you could say to yourself, okay, why am I doing this? Let's bring those patterns up to the forefront of my mind and see if we can change the pattern.
Is it difficult to change those patterns? I imagine it's very difficult.
It's easier than you think.
Okay.
Yeah,
How,
it's
how would
easier.
how would somebody go about it?
So there are certain ways that we could tap into the subconscious mind. So our mind, we have the conscious mind, which is like our awareness, right? That's like the top. Like I've seen it depicted as an iceberg before, so it's like the top that's above the water line, right? And it's just a little bit. It controls like on average 3 to 5% of our thoughts, our emotions, and our behavior. So this is difficult for people to grasp because everybody wants to feel like we have free agency. Well, of course, I make my own decisions, and I have full control over my mind. But your conscious awareness again guides 3 to 5% of your thoughts, your emotions, and your behavior. The other 95 to 97% is guided by your subconscious mind that is patterned really early in childhood. And that's all that other stuff that you see on, I think everyone's seen the iceberg representation where you have the water line and you have all this stuff underneath and then you've got a little cap that's peeking out from the water line. So that is a good illustration for the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. So the subconscious mind doesn't speak the same language as your conscious mind. So you and I are right now, we're using language, verbal language and body language. I have my hands flowing and we're using our facial expressions. And that's what our conscious mind understands. But our subconscious mind speaks a different language. And it's about imagery, emotion, and repetition. So if I were to say to you, Aaron, whatever you do, don't think about a pink elephant.
Yeah.
You just laughed.
Straight away.
What happened there? What happened?
Yeah, straight away.
Straight away,
The first
right?
thing, yeah.
Right. And it'll happen consistently every time. You can't control it. You cannot control the subconscious mind in that way, right? So I told you don't think about a pink elephant, but did you get this cute little elephant that pops into your mind?
Pretty much, yeah.
As an image.
Yeah, but I was trying to fight it, but yeah.
That's your subconscious mind that just came online. So it's hard to fight. And again, your subconscious mind doesn't speak the language that we do. So me saying don't, no, it doesn't understand that language. It would have responded in the same way had I said, think about a pink elephant or don't think about a pink elephant. The subconscious mind speaks in terms of imagery and emotion. So was there an emotion that came up for you when you thought of the pink elephant?
Probably, but I'm not 100% to be honest. It was it was pleasant thought, but as well at the same time I was like annoyed at myself because I I did it. So it was a bit of a conflicted, weird one, but yeah.
So I don't know if you're aware of this because I'm staring at you, right? I see you now. When I said don't think of the pink elephant, you immediately smiled and laughed.
Yeah.
So you had an emotional reaction. You smiled at something, right?
Yeah.
So that's your subconscious mind. And so again, the way in which we unpack some of these patterns is the same way in which they were patterned in the first place, which is through repetition, imagery, and associated emotion, right? So we can do this through very specific exercises, but something like a daily affirmation is not going to do the trick. So I know there's a lot of advice on the internet, and I respect everyone in their field, but if you get up in the morning and you recite a daily affirmation, that's from your conscious awareness. It's not going to impact you at the level that you're really seeking to impact in terms of your actual emotional patterns and your thought patterns.
Yeah, I've experienced that because there is a clear separation. To be fair, um, and when you get tired or you run down or something, you always revert back to that unconscious state where you'll do what you've always done, sort of thing. So I completely understand, and I'm on board with that. That you need to get it ingrained in. Actually, it becomes a pattern of behavior and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as much as we want to think that we have free agency over our minds, again, we're mostly on autopilot running these programs. The mind is almost like a computer system, and we're running these programs over and over and over. I don't know if you've ever experienced, getting in your car and driving somewhere to a place that you drive to frequently. So maybe you drive over, if you have an office space, or maybe you drive to the gym 4 times a week. And I don't know if you've ever experienced the phenomenon where you get into your car and you're listening either to music or you're deep in thoughts about something. And you arrive at your destination and you're like, I don't even remember driving here. Like, have you ever felt that?
Yeah, far too often. Far too often.
Right. And it's because you don't need to be consciously aware to take a pattern that's well rooted in your mind. Your subconscious takes over and says, I got this, I know where we're going. So you can continue to think about that difficult conversation you had, or to listen to that song on repeat 3 times, get to your destination. Then you consciously become aware, okay, I'm here, I don't really remember driving here. So we've all experienced the switch between our subconscious mind and our conscious mind. Just to give you an example, it's take note of the next time that this happens, and thank your subconscious mind. Thank you for getting me here. It's kind of funny that I didn't really need to pay attention.
Yeah, yeah, it's quite amazing, really, what it can do. But obviously, it can have negative effects on us as well, and in relationships especially. How do you? So if you've been in a relationship for some time, rather than just start a relationship necessarily, you get ingrained in these patterns, and you both do. So how do you change those patterns after they were ingrained there for such a long time? That's what I find difficult, because it's not just you; it's the whole dynamic of the relationship at that point. If it's been for several years, it becomes the dynamic of the relationship. How do you change that dynamic to make it healthier and bring it back, especially if the other person is reluctant to change?
So it's such a great question. Most people initially have a little reluctance to change. There's a little bit of ego involved, right? It's like, well, I'm fine. My mind is fine. So it takes a certain amount of awareness to realize that we all have something to learn and we can all grow. And my advice is always to first work on yourself, because the way in which you interact in relationship, especially to yourself, is the key point. So, I don't focus on the let's fix the relationship. what my focus is on, let's understand what your core wounds are, your emotional patterns, how are you dealing with things, and your communication style. So what often gets in the way of a healthy relationship is how individuals are communicating to each other and their behavioral coping mechanisms. Those are the two things that really generally rub someone the wrong way. So when I start working with a client, what I do is it's not traditional therapy in the sense of tell me about your childhood. That's not necessarily where I start. Where I start is tell me about something that happened maybe yesterday or last week in your recent memory where something happened and you just felt, sort of this really negative or explosive emotional charge, something that got you angry or got you really frustrated or made you really sad. So, I mean, I could ask you if you're open to sharing, Aaron, if there was something, and share as much as you're open to sharing. But if you can think of an example of something that happened recently that really got your motor running.
Um, there's nothing major recently that I necessarily want to share, but ultimately I know how I react, and I have done it recently, and I do it a lot. I just shut up shop, close all the doors, shut everybody out. That's my go-to mechanism. I get to a certain point, if I'm overwhelmed, I just shut all the doors, shut everybody out, and I push everybody out until that feeling goes away, almost, if you know what I mean,
Mm-hmm.
until I can bring myself back to some sort of balance, and I feel like,
Yes.
okay, I can let people back in again, and that's my go-to coping mechanism, which is not always healthy, and it does cause problems in relationships a lot of the time.
It can. It definitely can, especially if your partner doesn't understand while you're pulling away, especially if your partner has certain core wounds around, I will be abandoned, I will be excluded, I am unlikable. So if you have core wounds like that and your partner's pulling away, it's very triggering to them. So it activates their anxiety. And at the same time, you're pulling away to try and regulate your own nervous system, but you're sort of activating them. So what you're describing, by the way, is called stonewalling. So it's this like not wanting to engage. It is the primary emotional behavioral coping mechanism of the dismissive avoidant. I'm not diagnosing you with anything. Again, like attachment styles are not an illness or disease. We don't diagnose people. But I'm saying that if we were to line up that behavior with the type of attachment style that we're talking about, it generally falls into the dismissive avoidant side. Sometimes it falls into the fearful avoidant too. And when you feel overwhelmed, that detaching and taking space to regulate your nervous system, that's what works for you. But I'm going to venture a guess to say that there have been times where this didn't work for your partner.
No, it regularly doesn't work.
Right.
Regularly doesn't work. So
Yeah.
it's a problem.
Yeah, I would say so. So, because to the other person, it might feel like life or death. Again, they just want to resolve the conflict. Being in conflict feels so dysregulating for them. So if you take a day of space, let me calm down, I have to take a day of space. If that other person you were in a relationship with that was emotionally regulated, they could say, okay, Aaron needs a day of space. That doesn't mean he's going to break up with me. It doesn't mean he doesn't love me. It doesn't mean that he thinks I'm ABC. He just needs a day of space. They could rationalize it. But people who are emotionally dysregulated, again, because of the childhood that they had, there's no blaming, there's no shaming. They don't have the same ability. So when you pull away, they're likely going to chase after you and say, Aaron, we just need to talk about it now. I don't want to go to sleep angry, and that let's have a conversation. And they just want to have a 5-hour conversation. And you're like, you're not understanding me. I need space. Because
Yeah,
you're really.
that makes me worse, trying to get me to
Yes.
open up and discuss. Yeah, it makes me worse.
Yeah, because you're being boxed into a corner. So in this case, I don't know if you have a partner or not, but in this scenario that we're talking about, I'm pairing you up with someone who's anxiously preoccupied, for the example, and this person is emotionally dysregulated, and in this moment, you're also emotionally dysregulated, and the two of you are trying to regulate your own nervous systems, but in the complete opposite way. And neither one of you knows how to co-regulate, which means use each other for comfort and support while you also individually work through it. Right? So it's
Yeah.
like one way to co-regulate, I find very effective, would be like cuddling. So we don't have to talk about it right now. I understand that, for example, what I said was really hurtful. We can talk about it tomorrow, but in the meantime, can we just cuddle in silence with each other? And most people don't know how to do this, right? And this is like a nice compromise because, you know, the person who needs the closeness gets that closeness, and you're the person that needs the space. You're not being forced to talk in the moment where you're not ready to talk. But yeah, we can cuddle. That's fine, right? Like, so there are ways to
Yeah.
co-regulate. I forget the initial question that you asked. I'm not sure if I answered it.
Yeah, you have really. It's about how you kind of them different styles and the racial dynamics and how you make that work to co-regulate essentially to find that way forward that you works for both of you really rather than obviously clashing heads and having these opposed needs and opinions all the time.
Yeah. So, Aaron, I asked, like, I wonder, like, in those moments where you feel your emotions rising, and they can feel very explosive, do you say to your partner, instead of just, for example, stonewalling, shutting down, not answering your phone, not responding to a text, leaving the house, like, instead of just doing that, do you say to your partner, I need a few hours alone. I'm feeling like I need to calm down, but I promise you, let's talk about it later tonight after 8 o'clock when I'm home.
No, I'm terrible at that because I'll be honest, I'm terrible at that. I get to the point where I think I let it go too far. Rather than saying it sooner when I feel it happening, I let it get too far, and then I just feel like I can't, and then I just
Yeah.
and
So
then just go into that mode.
yeah, so I would say that that would be, instead of trying to fix a relationship, because a relationship is just a dynamic that you have with someone else, right? So instead of trying to fix the dynamic, look at your own patterns first. So you know that this particular pattern is not necessarily serving you well. So why do you shut down, right? What is the core wound there? And the core wound is generally you feel unsafe. There's something that makes you feel like vulnerable, right? You'll lose your freedom. You're going to be trapped. These are some of the core wounds that you may or may not be consciously aware of. But your work would be to start understanding, okay, what is my thought pattern? So the next time this happens to you and you feel that emotion rise and you just want to run away, because I know you know what that feels like. It's very distinct,
Yeah,
right? It's like
yeah,
your heart starts racing because our body has two different nervous systems, right? Our calm, regular nervous system is the parasympathetic nervous system. And then the sympathetic nervous system is our fight or flight. And that is there for as a survival mechanism. So if in the day there was a big grizzly bear that came up to us, we needed to be able to quickly run away, fight, defend. So your heart actually starts beating, your muscles stiffen a little bit. It's like you're getting ready to jolt, right? Like there's a threat in front of you, except in nowadays we're not talking about a grizzly bear, but there's an emotional threat. Someone is making you feel unsafe. And so next time that happens, Aaron, take a moment and ask yourself, what do I perceive the threat to be? And what am I thinking about at this moment? So if you can identify what you're thinking about in the moment, that will be a huge step to understanding how your thoughts are linked to your emotions and then linked to your behavior. So there is a correlation between all of them. So if your heart starts racing and your muscles are tensing up and you've got this strong desire to run, what are your thoughts? Could be something like, I have to get out of here or I'm going to punch a wall. I have to get out of here or I'm going to say something that I don't want to say. I have to get out of here or I'm going to totally lose my mind.
Yeah.
That's and right.
Yeah.
Am I hitting on some of the right? Um,
Yeah.
but a lot of the times our thoughts trick us also, right? This is what's so interesting about this work, is that if you can actually understand your thought patterns, you can realize that they're not necessarily guiding you well. So, I have to get out of here because I'm going to lose my mind. You're not going to lose your mind. That's a story that you're telling yourself. What you're really afraid of is that you're not going to handle the emotion that surfaces, and you don't want the other person to see you in that vulnerable state. So you run and you hide.
Yeah, I'm terrible for that. That if I'm feeling vulnerable, I'll try and hide that. And if I'm struggling to hide it, I will remove myself.
Of course you will. So that's a shame wound, right? So the only reason that we run and hide, like think about when you do something and you feel really embarrassed. Like what is your first instinct when you do something that's embarrassing and others notice?
Just crawl in a hole somewhere and hide away.
Yeah, I mean, and you'll see this depicted in movies, you'll see it in real life. Like I mean, one of the most fascinating things to me is to just watch people. So if you've ever been sipping a coffee in a park somewhere and someone walks by and they trip accidentally, happens to the best of us. I trip all the time. I'm kind of clumsy. You will notice almost 100% of the time the person will go, it's a reaction. It's a shame reaction. They're hiding. They're covering their eyes as if that makes them invisible, which is ridiculous, right? Everyone just saw them trip. But you will see that they will do this because they're shamed, right? And so it makes sense that if you feel like you're going to be embarrassed or you're afraid of being judged, someone might, maybe you learned somewhere along the way that being emotional was weak. It's not. But there would have been a story or something that you learned where your patterning says, Aaron, don't show that side to other people. It's not safe. Keep it under wraps, hide it. Nobody wants to see it. You would have learned that somewhere. And the hard part is that you have to start as an adult questioning, is that really true? Like, if I open up to my partner, are they going to judge me? Are they going to think that I'm weak? Or is it going to maybe build a closer understanding that we have with each other? And maybe the next time I'll just say to that person, I need 2 hours by myself. Can you give me that? Is it okay? I promise you that if you say it that way, you'll get what you need. No
Yeah, I
fighting.
think no. Obviously that's much healthier way to handle it, and I think over my life the way I've handled it, which is probably the issue, is you do it, you run away, it actually works and it soothes you. So then after the fact, you tend to justify it. Oh, I did it because of
Oh,
this. And this is why, and you justify it to yourself, and then you kind of reinforce it, and then it becomes you just more and more ingrained, really, as a coping mechanism.
yeah. Language is so interesting. I love when people speak because you just talked about how you intellectualize your emotions. You
Yeah,
rationalize after the fact. Again, you're protecting your ego. You don't want, you want to have a reason for why you reacted that way, a narrative that fits within what you consider to be acceptable. You can't just say, listen, that spiked my anxiety a little. I would be honest, right? But what we do is we rationalize, right? And again, dismissive avoidance as emotional patterns, and as personality traits, more specifically, are very logical. They're very rational. Um, what they are at times, and this is their work, is a little disconnected from their emotions. They don't like feeling their emotions, which none of us like or enjoy feeling difficult emotions. But the way in which you handle it when these difficult emotions come up is displayed in our behavior, right? So again, I'm not diagnosing anyone, but you're very much describing certain personality traits of a particular subset of the population. And I don't know how much you've seen this online because attachment styles are being talked about a lot now. The avoidant folks, the dismissive avoidance and the fearful avoidance, they often get really heavily bashed, especially in like the dating world. Like, don't date an avoidant; they'll break your heart. And I think that that's very unfair. Uh, and again, on the other side, the anxious preoccupied person often gets labeled or characterized almost like a cartoon character of being the really clingy, the really needy, the crazy person. And I think we do a really terrible disservice when we create these like labels and put people in boxes. So I want people to understand that attachment styles are a spectrum. So, and they evolve over time depending on if you've invested to do the work and understand your own mind, the types of relationships that you have beyond just your primary caregivers, and also whether you believe that change is possible or not. So you can heal to the point where the same triggers are not causing the same amount of intense reaction and they're happening less. You may always be slightly triggered by something, but we want to dial back the intensity because we want to keep you more at like an emotionally regulated space. And the last thing I'll say about this too is that the internet loves to categorize attachment styles by gender, which is ridiculous. It is not gender based. So we love to show memes of men who are dismissive avoidant and women who are anxious preoccupied. Of course, that does happen, but the reverse also happens too. I'm far more avoidant on the spectrum of things, and I've had to learn to communicate to people and say, I need a little bit of time. I promise, like, first of all, you want people to know you're not ignoring them, right? I promise we'll come back to it. Don't press me. It doesn't go well when you push me. Just give me a little bit of time. I'll come back to you. And then stay true to your word. Come back. Don't ignore the problem, right? So there are ways to, work on yourself. So ultimately, the relationship dynamic that you're in is much smoother.
Yeah, it's a lot of interesting stuff there, a lot of stuff to take away from it. Um, and it's quite, obviously we've talked about me and how I am, so it's quite personal to me in a lot of ways as well, so I can really relate to it. Because there are times, obviously, when I do that and I take myself away, but then other times when I'm completely comfortable in being vulnerable and being open and honest, when I'm not overwhelmed or it's, I'm in a positive place myself, then I'm, really, really okay with being vulnerable and open and sharing that side of me.
So that's beautiful. And it's beautiful that you recognize that context matters. So, is there, and you don't have to share this, but for your own reflection, is there a type of scenario that you're more comfortable with? So, for example, you're much more apt to be vulnerable and open when you're in your own space. Is that true for you? It could be.
Maybe I think a lot of it for me is sort of my confidence and self esteem, and if I feel, I think if I feel confident and feeling good about myself, then I'm much more comfortable. But I think I'm more sensitive to stuff if I'm feeling a bit insecure about myself rather than necessarily anybody else or anything else. I think that's when I really struggle a little bit, and then I'm much more sensitive to stuff and much less willing to share.
And that's really very fair. We're not intended to share our deep personal inner world with everyone. Like, I would hope for you that you have a couple of really grounded, solid people in your space who you do feel comfortable sharing with, right? But it's not, you don't have to share it with the entire world. And you're right, there are moments where we feel a little bit stronger and a little bit more concrete on this is how I'm feeling. And there are other moments where you're feeling overwhelmed. Is that for me? Are we getting a phone call?
Oh no, that's my alarm. I forgot to knock it off. Sorry.
That's okay. I thought we were getting a phone call.
No, no, we're not in trouble. We're not getting anybody calling in.
That's so funny. It kind of lost my train of thought a little bit there, but we do find, again, I talked about very specific patterns. So the dismissive avoidant is extremely sensitive to criticism. That's because they would have experienced a fair bit of it in childhood. And I've had this conversation with many people who are dismissive avoidant. Again, I don't know if you are or you aren't, but a lot of times they'll start off by saying, I had a great childhood. My parents were great. That's it. I think I can think of 5 or 6 people who have looked at me straight in the eye, who have said that to me. And I'm like, that's interesting, because the patterns come from somewhere. So if your parents were emotionally attuned to you and they would have given you space to feel your emotions, you wouldn't at this point in your life feel the need to hide some of them. Like, it really is that straight up. So it's not about shaming parents. I really believe, I'm also a parent. I've raised 2 sons. They're both away at university. It's not about shaming the parents, because we all do the best that we can in the time, in that moment. But you do have to dig a little bit deeper. You did learn at some point in time to repress these certain things. You did learn what was acceptable and what wasn't acceptable. And someone who has such a strong response to these, emotional, so difficult emotions, who their response is so triggering that they have to run and hide, there's often neglect there, and quite a bit of punishment also, like reinforcing or punishing. Instead of reinforcing good behavior, it's punishment of bad. And so the child learns, don't go there.
I
So
wonder if I've learned it. I wonder if I've learned it by watching, because my family handle it very much this way. So they try to be very stoic and not show emotion, especially around the kids and stuff like that. So as I was growing up, they would hide these negative emotions from me a lot. So I think whether it's not learned through that, rather than necessarily being punished for showing emotion, it's more that they won't show it, and then you kind of learn, oh well, that's how I need to be as I get older, potentially.
Aaron, that's a beautiful reflection you just had. You're absolutely right. You pick up on the patterns, the modeling that your parents showed you. So if your parents were very stoic, as you say, didn't show a lot of emotion, then it's not a leap to understand why the child would have a similar pattern. Like, there's that expression, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. That's because it's grown from the tree, right? So what they showed you is what you'll generally repeat. And we said at the top of the show that these are like a set of rules for how to give and receive love, how to connect with others. And so that got ingrained into you. And again, it's not about saying that parents are good or bad, but the way they chose to handle things is how your perception was shaped for the way that you need to walk in this world.
Yeah, definitely. It makes a lot of sense to me. It makes a lot of
Yeah,
sense. Yeah.
it kind of does, right? When you pull it
Yeah.
apart. But just like your mind was once patterned by watching your parents, you now at this age and at this stage of your life, you didn't as a child. As a child, you don't have you haven't developed critical thought, right? The mind develops later on and you could start asking questions and critical thought. Now you have the intellect to go back and say, okay, was that really the best way? Because if I think there's a better way, I can change my behavior. Now, most people don't do this. Most people just accept that, well, I am who I am. Right? Like, and it's ego based, right? It's like, there's nothing wrong with me, but you're angry most of the time. Yeah, that's because, and they rationalize, right? But you don't have to be. You don't like living in that sort of like stressed out, angry state it's so problematic in terms of your relationship to yourself, your physical health, your enjoyment of life, the relationships that you have to others, the general quality of your life. That's how important this stuff is. So, your ability to connect with others in a healthy way, that's really the beauty of life, right? Like, even Esther Perel talks about the beauty of relationships and how those relationships really equate to the actual quality of your life.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's massive, and I'm, I'm strange because I'm quite a social person, but I'm also quite introverted in a lot of ways. So it's a bit of a balance for me, and I have I call it a social battery, I guess. But there's only so much because it takes a lot of energy for me to socialize. But if I don't socialize, it really impacts my mental health and my happiness overall. So I put a
Uh,
lot of weight. Sorry, go on.
no, please finish your thought.
Yeah, I put a lot of weight on relationships and experiences over sort of materialistic things and stuff. That's just kind of it's kind of the way I was brought up as a child. That's people are more important, family's more important. People you care about much more important than stuff or things or money or any of that. And that's carried on with me through life. So I do value social interaction and relationships with people very highly. Doesn't mean I'm necessarily good at them, but I do value them highly.
When I work with clients, I keep a running list. So one of the things because you started off your sent, and it was a beautiful reflection you just shared with me. But you started off by saying, "I'm kind of strange." So you've labeled yourself, and if you said it, you believe it. So the first thing I would do is I would say, okay, let's write that down into our stories list, right? Because as humans, we are really good at telling ourselves stories. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. We will convince ourselves that it's true. So, I would say, okay, I am very strange. Let's write that down. Is there actually any evidence that you're strange? Because from what you just shared with me, your experience is very, very predictable, understanding, and common. Most people have a sweet spot between how much they want to interact with others and how much personal time that they need. Many people will tell you that they like to interact and then they need a day to themselves, that they need to emotionally recharge. So, this is a very common emotional pattern. Somehow, you have been led to believe that this is weird, strange, uncommon. It's not.
I think I base it on you just have this for some reason you just think of it as a polar thing, whereas like you're either extroverted or introverted, and then I kind of flip between the two. So I think that's probably where that comes from. And even saying it, I know that's silly to say, but that's obviously where that comes from. That belief that they are two polar opposites, and you either sit on one end of the scale or the other. But
Yeah.
even saying it, I know that doesn't make much sense because it's going to be a scale, isn't it?
Yeah, so like everything else, it's a continuum, right? Like people very rarely fall squarely into one box. They lean one way or another, and for those that fall squarely in the middle, like out of let's say 7 days in the week, I'm happy socializing 3.5 and being alone 3.5. Like I'm like really in the middle, which means if I have lunch with someone, I don't want to see someone at night. I'll spend the day together if I'm going out that night. Sorry, I'll spend the day alone if I know that I'm going out at night, because that's how I manage it. I'm really smack in the middle. And then we as humans, we're creative. We need to find new labels for ourselves and so I call myself the outgoing introvert.
I like that.
You can grab it.
I'm definitely going to steal that one.
Yeah, and so I remember like I don't really drink very often. I don't really party, but I did like over the summer go out with a group of girlfriends, and we went to a club, and it was one of those nights that ended at 3 a.m. And the next weekend they were like, "Come on, Bev, let's go." And I was like, "Are you kidding me? Call me back in 6 months." Like that one night was enough for me for 6 months. Like so what's so beautiful about this is that as you get older in particular, and part of this work is understanding out of your attachment style, what are actually your personality needs. So what are your needs? And if your need is to truly balance social time versus time that you're alone, and you understand it and you own it, then it becomes very simple to explain to someone in your inner world, whether that be a partner, a good friend, a family member, that, hey, you know what? It is too much for me to spend a whole week together. Like maybe we don't spend a whole week. Maybe we make the trip 3 days. It's like, and because you now understand yourself better, you can find the language, right? And so most people don't necessarily understand what triggers them, what they actually need. And so when they go to start communicating this to their partner or to a friend or a family member, they're at a loss for words. They don't, because they themselves don't understand what they need, right?
Yeah, I think it's difficult for us as well as humans, especially if we, care or love someone, to tell them actually we need a bit of time away, because we're afraid of hurting that person's feelings as well, and we're afraid of them perceiving that as a rejection almost.
Yeah, and they might. It's very true. They might. So at some point in time, your patterning is don't do that. Someone's going to get upset and you're going to have to deal with the blowout. So it's the dealing with the blowout that you don't want to deal with. That's the avoidance piece. So you hurt someone's feelings. A day later, they're going to come back and want to have a talk about it, or they're going to cry. They're going to have an emotional reaction. That's the piece you don't want to deal with. But if you actually become authentic and genuine with yourself, and you understand your own needs and you explain it to someone, it's not personal. It's not that I don't enjoy spending time with you, but I need time to recharge. And then when I'm with you, I can fully enjoy our time together without feeling like, I'm stressed, or I know that I'll be less irritable, or I'll feel calmer. And most people who are all people that are emotionally regulated will understand that. And they'll say, you know what, Aaron, no problem. Like, instead of seeing you Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, why don't we shoot for Friday and Tuesday? Maybe that's enough for us, right? They will meet you where you're at if you explain it. If you avoid, stonewall, and don't engage in conversation, people will interpret that as disrespectful and rejectful, right? Because if I send you a text and I'm like, hey, Aaron, let's hang out tonight, but you really don't want to hang out because you need time alone, and you don't respond to my text, it's very possible that I'll say, what the hell's wrong with Aaron? What did I do to him? How can he not even respond? Like, we take things personally. But you're just like, it has nothing to, in your mind, it has nothing to do with Bev. I just need time alone. But you haven't communicated that to me. Like, as people, we are really not good mind readers. So I would encourage you that the next time you want to say no, you don't have to overly explain, but a little bit of communication will say, I'd love to see you. I'm not feeling up to it today. Let's maybe next week, something like that.
Yeah, it's definitely something I need to work on, an area I need to be better at. Definitely.
Yeah, we never, rejection is a wound that many people carry, right? Which is like, it's linked to, I am unlovable, I am unlikable, I will be excluded, I will be abandoned. So you can see how it's all connected in that space. So if you're mindful of the fact that the other person might get triggered to those wounds, you can absolutely mitigate that. You can absolutely, so the worst thing you can do when you're in a close relationship with someone is ignore them. That is, in my opinion, one of the most disrespectful things that we can do as humans to one another. Pretend like you don't exist. I'm just going to ignore you. That really hurts.
Yeah,
and that's not, sorry, go ahead.
That's something I've been bad at. That kind of, when I'm in that, not all constantly, but when I'm in that headspace, I just avoid everything. I'm really bad for that.
Yeah, and so you could be inadvertently, you're in your mind, you're rationalizing that, you don't want to hurt someone's feelings, so you don't want to say anything, but you're actually hurting their feelings even more by ignoring them. Yeah. So, that would be the next time you have this like feeling where it's like, I just want to run away and hide from the world. Just calmly say to people, even by text, I need a couple of hours to myself. Let me get back to you tonight. I promise you that this will mitigate 99% of your problems.
I'm definitely going to give this a whirl. I'm going to try and be better at it. Definitely.
It'll make your life easier, right? And if the person continues to push and push, okay, well, that's on them. They're not respecting your boundary.
Yeah, that's good. I'm definitely going to take this on board and use it moving forward, guaranteed. It's definitely an area I need to work on. We spoke about, all these attachment styles and how it's big on the internet at the minute. Something else that's big on the internet to do with relationships and stuff is everybody calling everybody a narcissist these days. What's your view on that?
I think it's ridiculous. I really do. So I am convinced that majority of people don't know the true definition of a narcissist. So first of all, a couple of things. And I think this is going to blow your mind. Almost everyone has narcissistic traits, because there's a vast difference between having narcissistic traits, which we need to some degree for our survival. Right? We need to be concerned about ourselves for a certain degree. And then having NPD, right? Narcissistic personality disorder. That's a whole other ball of wax. So we tend to, conflate the two. They are not the same thing. There's certainly certain things that I do that some people might point out and go, well, that's a bit narcissistic. They're probably right. Again, we all have narcissistic traits to various degrees. That doesn't mean someone has NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, and it is so overused. Layman's people diagnosing everyone else with narcissism, and this one has borderline, and this one. Since when did everyone become psychiatrists to diagnose each other? Just focus on yourself. If you can figure out your own mind and worry less about diagnosing the people around you, because what you're really deflecting, right? Like if you're so keen on developing a narrative that your last relationship just didn't work because your ex was a narcissist, you can see how that completely removes you from the equation. Well, I have no personal accountability. My ex, Aaron, he's a total narcissist. He just screwed the whole thing up. I mean, what do you do with a narcissist, right? You can see how that's so beautifully easy. And again, it's nothing that I did. He's the one with the problem. Well, hold on a minute. The dynamic wasn't good. You both brought in things that were good and bad. And sometimes, even if you're two fantastic people, your dynamic is not so good. You know, sometimes people bring out the best in you, sometimes they bring out the worst. So I really dislike labels. And so that's why I continue to say that attachment styles are a continuum, right? We're talking about a set of traits. And I really wish that people would stop throwing around mental illness disorders, because I think it muddies the waters. I think it's disrespectful. And I think, again, it serves as a beautiful way to take yourself out of a dynamic that you were clearly engaged in. And so if everyone would focus on becoming the person that they want to be, to uphold the values that they hold dear, because that's where the hard work is. If everyone would focus inward instead of outward, I think we would be in a much different place in our society.
Definitely. There's so much of it out there on the internet. Everything you see is narcissist this and listing traits and stuff like that. And it's, for me, obviously, if you're in a relationship, have you communicated your displeasure with any of the stuff, any of the issues? Have you tried to work on it together? And it's easy to say once you've separated, because especially towards the end of a relationship, if things aren't going well and you kind of growing apart almost, or going separate ways, then your traits, both of your traits, will become more and more narcissistic, because you're going to be, rather than focusing on the relationship, you're going to be focused on yourself more and more, and self-preservation and doing what's best for you, rather than trying to work on the relationship. So it's easy to sell it and say, oh, this person did this, so they must be a narcissist. But it doesn't necessarily pan out that way.
No, it doesn't. And it's actually, that's a terrific sign. So FYI, if you're on a first date, second date with someone in early dating, and they refer to their ex as crazy, narcissistic, whatever labels people like to give to blame other people, that is a beautiful sign of emotional dysregulation of the person you're sitting across from. Because if that person doesn't have the insight to understand that they themselves contributed to that dynamic, that they themselves chose that person, that their behavior might have contributed to the outcome of the relationship, then that person has not done the self-reflection. And if you enter into a relationship with them and it goes south, I can guarantee you 100%, the next person they go out on a date with, they will also describe you as a narcissist. She was a total bitch. She was a narcissist. She was crazy. They will continue this pattern. I've seen it. Aaron, have you seen it?
Yeah, I've seen it, and it's frustrating, because, and I get it, self-awareness is difficult, and diving into yourself and your own flaws and what you could do better. It's difficult and it's hard, and people don't want to face that mirror, do they? And it's easier sometimes to just blame that person, move on, and try to find somebody else who's going to fix all our problems.
Yeah, I wish people understood. I wish that they could experience for a day, let's say. I know this is like impossible, but for those who, again, we talked about how when you're emotionally dysregulated, it's hard to understand that you're actually emotionally dysregulated, because that is your baseline, right? That's like what you know to be true. But and again, I lived in that state for a very long time until I did the work. And then now I wake up and I can sense that my nervous system is calm and I feel differently, and my body is relaxed, and all these sensations that I had never felt before. And it's such a better way to live. But it's almost like if we could take that feeling of what it feels like to be emotionally regulated and calm and implant it into someone for a day, this is your prize. This is what it actually feels like once you get through all the mud. This is what the other side feels like. Then I believe everyone would choose to do therapy and engage. The prize is not the person that you could then attract, or that the prize is that you yourself will feel so much better in your own skin. It's not easy to feel always anxious, always angry, always pissed off, always hyper vigilant. Nobody wants that feeling. And when you know what it feels like to actually finally be calm, it's beautiful. So I wish people could experience it even for a moment, so they would know really why doing the work and why diving into these trigger points in our thought processes, why this actually matters. It's not about saving a relationship. It's about you living the quality of life that you deserve. And you can't do that when you're constantly on edge. You can't feel pleasure in the same way. Your mind is not as creative, it's not as productive. You can't engage in those really beautiful moments of intimacy. Your mind doesn't allow you to do these things when you're in that parasympathetic nervous system mode. So that's what I hope that your audience takes away from this is yes, it's difficult to become self-aware, but the prize on the other end of it, it's so worth it.
Yeah, from my experience, a lot of people who wouldn't say afraid to go to therapy, but reluctant to go and just have this mindset that, oh, it's not going to change anything. What's talking about it going to do? That seems to be the mindset a lot. And I think until people get to the point in their life where they want change and they want to do it, I find it similar to like giving up smoking or something like that. Unless you really want to, you can stick all the patches on you want, but if you're not actually going to commit to try and to make that change, then it's never going to happen. Do you find you get a lot of people that in that same sort of mindset, same boat?
Yeah, I do. And you use a beautiful example about how important, motivation is, intrinsic motivation, right? So intrinsic coming from your internal source as opposed to extrinsic, which is like an external source, right? So it's like if your partner is like dragging you to go to couples therapy and you're like, I don't really want to go, and this isn't going to work, this is stupid. Well, most of the time what we believe to be true turns out to be true. So if you believe it's stupid and it's not going to work, you're right, it's not going to work. If you believe that it's going to be helpful and you engage, you're right, it'll be helpful. That's the interesting thing here, right? So yeah, I see a lot of people who have learned somewhere along the lines that therapy isn't for them, and that's fine. Um, Most people at some point in their life hit a pivotal moment, usually involving intense emotional pain, whether it was a heartbreak, like a breakup, a death, some sort of accident or otherwise traumatic event. Uh, and that's when they generally start to seek help. So some people do need to sort of sink to a depth of, I'm in terrible emotional pain. Other people are more open to the idea to prevent themselves from getting into that space. There's all sorts of reasons why people seek out, I would say, therapy, but kind of like anything else in this world, there's always a group of people that say, yeah, this is great, and a group of people who don't think it is. Like, and everyone feels right in their opinion, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think any sort of therapy and support is very personal to the individual as well, because obviously the majority of it you do with another person. So you need to also find the therapist or that person who you can connect with or you feel comfortable talking to and opening up to as well. And that's part of it, because you might have somebody who you just really don't connect with or you can't. buy into, but then you might find another therapist who's actually really, really good for you, really brilliant, and speaks to you. You can really take it on board what they're saying and understand it and start putting stuff into practice.
That's such a beautiful point that you bring up. And Gabor Mate, he's a medical doctor. You can find him online. He does a lot of work. He did in the areas of addiction and understanding the connection between mental health and physical health. A brilliant doctor. And he actually says in one of his, I think it was a TED Talk, that the quality or the outcome of therapy, whether it's effective or not, is directly most correlated to the relationship between the practitioner and the client, which is exactly what you just said. If let's say you and I are in a client practitioner relationship, and you feel heard, understood, not judged by me, which is really the qualities that someone needs in order to heal, that's so much more important than the modality of therapy that I'm using. Most people need to feel seen, heard, and understood to start healing. So the relationship that you have with your therapist is absolutely critical. If you meet with someone and they're not a good match for you, it's not therapy that's the problem. Find someone else. Like, and you might stumble upon that person who just gets you. That's where the real work will happen.
Yeah, it's definitely the case, I think. And people don't see it that way for whatever reason. It comes back to when I said I was strange about the introvert and extrovert. They see it as a polar thing. Oh, I've tried therapy, it doesn't work, even though you've only just spoke to one person who maybe you didn't quite feel comfortable with, or they didn't communicate with you in a way that you could understand or take on board, really.
So motivation is such an interesting thing, right? So I don't know, like if you really want something, you find it. Like that's really like the amount of effort that you put into things is completely related back to your motivation. So let's say you have a date Saturday night and you go off to the shopping center and you really want a new pair of jeans. Like you have a look that you really want to recreate for this special date you have on Saturday night, right? You go to the first store, they don't have the jeans that you're looking for. Do you go, oh, well, I guess I can't find the jeans and leave the shopping center? Or do you go to the next store and see if they have what you're looking for? Right? And then depending on how motivated you are, the next store might have it, but they don't have your size. All right, let's go to the next store. You're off to the third store. And so you'll put in potentially an hour, 2 hours of work to find the right pair of jeans if it's that important to you. Well, it's not that dissimilar, right? In terms of how important was this to begin with. So if you already thought that therapy was a waste of time, you're likely to dismiss it and go, well, there's no point in seeing another therapist. So the way in which you perceive things is really important.
Yeah, it's crucial, isn't it? And it's how you see yourself as well as a lot of it, because if you don't see that there's any issue, and again, if you just think, well, everybody else is the problem, then you won't even seek it at all in the first place.
True, until that person becomes 40 years old and realizes that they can never get a second date. And they can never get a second date because they're emotionally dysregulated. So at that point in time, the logical, rational person would actually say, okay, is it the entire world that's crazy? Or maybe I have something to work on. So you have to be able to turn the mirror inward at some point. Emotional dysregulation in men and women, this is not a gender thing, is extreme. It's an extreme turnoff to a potential partner. So if I'm dating and someone has frequent mood changes, or they get irritated very easily, or I see we're driving in their car and they're swerving in and out, like they're really annoyed by traffic, I'm turned off. Like, to me, that's a bunch of drama. That's a bunch of chaos. That's like, you know what? You're aggravated for nothing. I could only imagine what you would be like if you were aggravated over something important. Like, so that, people, and the same thing is true on the other end. Sometimes like men will say, you know what, they sat down and the woman was so entitled, or she expected so much, or she's still, she was unpleasant, and she complained a lot, and these behaviors are very specific to being emotionally regulated. And so if you keep going out on these first dates and you keep getting rejected, it's usually somewhere in that realm, right? You're not being rejected because of your physical appearance. Let's be clear. They've already likely seen pictures of you, right? And they've already likely had a phone conversation with you. It's how you behave, that's either going to attract someone and see you as a good, stable partner, or the person you're on a date with is going to assess the risk of getting to know you, like the money, the time, the effort, the resources that I need to put in to get to know you. That risk is going to be, they will ascertain the risk to be too high. This person is unstable. They're going to bring chaos into my life. So yeah, I think emotional regulation is critically important, and that's a skill that was either modeled for you through your parents, your caregivers, or it wasn't. And if you don't know how to self-soothe and to emotionally regulate, and you're carrying around all these wounds and these traumas that are unprocessed in your body, it is your work to go and work through that so that you yourself can be the best possible version of yourself and partner. So the one takeaway here is I always say, first become the person that you're trying to attract. So if you say that you want someone honest and transparent and loyal and kind, become all those things first, right? Because like attracts like. This is why I always laugh when people say to me, I attract all the crazy people. And I'm like, fascinating. Tell me more. Anyways, I see that we've been talking an hour and a half. That's a long
Yes,
time.
it's flown. It's flown. It's
Yeah.
just to go back to that as well. You're talking about obviously the attraction element and the people who get stressed easily and stuff, and some of that's got to be rooted in sort of our genetic code and from history, like I say, back to the caveman days almost. If somebody's not able to emotionally regulate and cope with kind of stresses, how are they going to be in a high stress situation when your life depends on it? And that kind of, that's the kind of thing that's ingrained in us, isn't it? We're very sensitive to that kind of behavior, really, because ultimately, no matter how much chaos we like, because people do tend to like a little bit of chaos here and there, or whatever. We're still looking for that security and safety as well, or at least an amount that we are comfortable with.
100%. So every human has basic emotional needs. Once their needs for their physical and their safety needs are met, there's basic emotional needs. And some of them are opposites of each other. So for example, certainty and uncertainty. So where we do need a level of certainty, and then the uncertainty is like the novelty and the mystery and the adventure. And the degree by which I need certainty versus uncertainty is going to be different from you and from other people. But we all have these needs, again, for certainty, uncertainty, significance, love and connection, contribution, and growth. So, there are some people whose primary need is growth. And these are the people who are immersed in all sorts of topics, and they're like sponges, and they need a partner that they could go to museums with and go on adventures with. Like, that's what's really important to them. So it's how we prioritize and categorize all these human needs. So you're right, certainty is very important, and emotional stability is a component of certainty. If we're in trouble, I want to know that my partner can handle the situation, whether I'm thinking about it consciously or unconsciously.
Yeah, that's definitely built into us. I've noticed it in myself, and I've noticed it in others. There's always that that balance that you're trying to seek. You want that level of safety. Everybody wants that little bit of uncertainty, like you say, but you always want that level of safety that, you know, actually, if things are getting a bit much, I can retreat to this and I'll be safe.
Yeah, of course. Right. So, you know, the opposite of certainty is uncertainty, but it's also chaos. Right. So, you know, and chaos, that really is the output of, you know, emotional dysregulation. So if someone is emotionally dysregulated, they're very hard to predict, which means they've got a short fuse. They get triggered easily, more intensely. They're liable to, you know, do things that would be, you know, violent. Right? They're much more liable to be in some form of addiction. So there's a whole bunch of risks associated to being emotionally dysregulated, which equates to, if you're that person's partner, chaos. And so whether you're able to articulate it or not, if you yourself are emotionally regulated and you see that in someone else, you will know to walk away. You'll go, mm-mm, and you will walk away because you'll know that this doesn't represent a safe, secure, certain relationship. The people that will stay and go, ooh, this is fun, are the people who are also dysregulated. That is just simply the truth. So it's not unusual that someone, for example, who's an alcoholic will also end up with an alcoholic because they enjoy that behavior together, right? So it is fascinating that there still exists this point of where people aren't self-aware to the point where they realize that, again, they're attracting people who are at the same emotional level that they're at. This is not to shame anyone. This is not, but these behaviors are very much tied to your ability to emotionally regulate.
Yeah, definitely. I've taken up loads of your time, Bev. I didn't want to keep you much longer. But it's been really, really brilliant to chat. How can people find you? Are you on social media, got a website, etc.?
Thank you. I do. Yeah. So my website is securelyloved.com. Again, securelyloved with a D.com. I'm also on Instagram, securely_loved. I also we're on TikTok. Now, if someone could teach me how to use TikTok properly, that would be great. So I think I'm a little older than you, Aaron, and I'm trying. I'm working on TikTok videos. So if anyone wants to throw me some tips, totally would appreciate that too. I believe it's also securely_loved. Again, I work with clients internationally. One of the first things that I have people do as just a point of awareness is to go on my website at securelyloved.com, and up at the top navigation, there's a link that says attachment quiz. The quiz itself is 5 minutes. It's free, and it'll give you some really interesting insights into where you fall on the attachment scale. And then, you know, if you want to learn more about attachment, you want to work with one of our counselors, practitioners, you could definitely do that. Securely Loved is a group of practitioners that work together. It's not just me. I have some beautiful practitioners that I work with. And we also offer group workshops. There are some people that just prefer to work in a group and, you know, meet others. And learn from others. So we also have group workshops that we offer twice a week. And it's a little more, I would say, affordable, economical. Like it's different when you meet with someone one-on-one versus you're in a group. So that's a beautiful option for people as well. So yeah, if you're interested, I would start with the free attachment quiz and, you know, let that be your starting point for your journey.
Lovely. What I'll do is I'll get the links and I'll put them all in the show notes, so it'll be easy for people to find and get in touch and to do that. I think it's definitely worthwhile. I mean, just this chat has helped me massively. Just, you know, talking about stuff and getting it through, and helping my level of understanding and self-awareness. So hopefully it's helped others as well, and hopefully they'll reach out and try and do a little bit of work as well to get themselves where they want to be. So
yeah, that's so great. Thank you for having me on.
Really,
and I hope the audience was able to pull something valuable from our discussion.
Really, really appreciate it. You've been brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aaron.
Take care.